Hi, everybody. This is another episode of our podcast, Artificial Intelligence and Cybersurgery. This is the official podcast of our journal, Artificial Intelligence Surgery. Uh, I'm Andrew Gums, and my co-host, Vincent Grasso, will invite our next guest.
Super. Thank you, Andrew. It's exciting to be at episode 84. We're marching up close to 100, and it's a great pleasure and privilege to have on Professor Eyad Elyad today. He's a an interesting guy. He's a professor of machine learning, computer vision, so he's got technical prowess. He's at Robert Gordon University. He's doing some interesting work that we're excited to learn about. And please, Professor, can you introduce yourself a little better and give us some background for our audience on the exciting work you're doing in AI? Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Vincent, and thanks, Andrew, for having me. As you said, I'm currently working in machine learning and computer vision. I think my journey started perhaps almost 30, 35 years ago with coding when things were much easier and the progress was much slower. I finished my first degree in 1999. I moved to the UK and I did my master degree in software engineering and then did my PhD in computer vision. But soon after joining Robert Gordon University, I think 99% of my work was allocated to the design and the development of what I used to call it AI-driven solution, or actually data-driven solution. Now, because Aberdeen, you might know, it's basically the oil and gas capital of Europe. So really, a lot of our research was applied to the oil and gas industry. So perhaps a warning. I'm not the best guy to talk about cybersurgery, but we can come to that later. But major,
Yeah, there aren't that many people who actually are, correct? I mean, that's why we, as you know, that's why we started you on the editorial board. That's why we started the journal. You know, we're the first journal and probably the only journal dedicated exclusively to artificial intelligence and surgery. So, it's a brave new world. That's why we're here. That's why we created this
absolutely,
podcast. And you've shifted gears, however,
absolutely,
and now
absolutely.
there aren't that many people who do machine learning and surgery like you do now. And the journal's been around now for I think almost 5 years, my
Five
friend.
years, yeah.
You're becoming an old man in this. I'm sorry to tell you.
Definitely. No, it was very rewarding experience, I have to say, Andrew, and huge credit for you and the team. And I'm really proud that I made a little contribution to the success of this journal. What I was telling Vincent, because my work, yes, it's in machine learning, but with emphasis in computer vision. So we were basically building solutions that detect problems. Like if we have an oil and gas asset running offshore, 105, 50 miles in the North Sea, and people are collecting video and images via ROVs, etc. So our task was to build models to detect problems, identify, say, corrosion, understand how, let's say, corrosion develops or evolves over time. And this is very important in such very expensive industry. But interestingly, when I joined the artificial intelligence surgery editorial board, I found that there is few similarities between the human body and any other, asset we work with, or machine, or equipment. Of course, the human is the most valuable thing. But I guess,
Well,
Andrew,
well, sadly, depending on who you ask, a lot of those
yeah,
billionaires
well,
who own those
true.
oil platforms, I'm not sure they would agree with you.
Yeah, well, you're right. But I was really fascinated by some of the questions that used to be raised during our AIS meeting. Like, you have two patients, they undergo similar surgery under the same conditions almost. And probably they have the same demographic and clinical past and information, and yet the outcome is hugely different. And that's where I was thinking, like, really, machine learning and AI could play a role, not necessarily in replacing the doctor, but in giving you more insights, more objective, data-driven, quantification, if you like, about why this happens, and that's why
Help,
I'm really grateful to join
help,
this.
you know? I
Channel.
mean, it's just what the surgeon wants more than anything is some help, for God's sakes, when there's a problem. Any amount of extra data, extra eyes, extra data would be, would be so welcome and so needed. An objective eye too.
100%. I think when I joined the editorial board, that was 2021 during the lockdown COVID. I remember our first meeting.
Yeah.
So I thought, yeah, I don't want to be just an editorial member. I would like to get involved into this. And I start reading a little bit about the surgery.
Yeah.
And it's entirely different world. Now, basically, in plain English, what we do, we train AI model to detect things of interest. So maybe imagine tracking and detecting cars, tracking and detecting human beings. Maybe you could use computer vision to provide some analytics for sports, track players' movement. That is the kind of things we were doing, or defect, or let's say a crack in a bridge. And these were challenging problems. These were challenging enough. But when I start through the artificial intelligence surgery journal, getting more involved, looking at a video of a surgery in a theater is far more complicated for the AI, and I would dare say even for the state of the art. There you want to detect tools, organs, actions, and so many other things in a very dynamic, changing environment. But that's really, I suppose, what makes science more exciting is when you work in a very challenging problem. And I'm glad to say over the past 4 years, I think we produced like 5 to 6 really top quality papers in the area of at least try to understand, video surgical analysis from machine vision AI point of view. So that's where we are right now.
Yeah, no, I mean your help in helping us build the journal has been fundamental because we're mainly surgeons and we need people like you intimately involved. I've been advocating for a while to have surgeons who actually ultimately end up getting degrees in computer science and what have you, and hopefully the younger generation is like heeding my warning. But one thing Vincent, I know you know about this, but it's been a hot topic. Vincent's located in New York, and a CEO of a big hospital system just basically went on record of saying that he wants to replace radiologists as soon as possible with AI. And my first thought to that is like, why don't we use AI to replace the CEO first? That would be the easiest, right?
I 100%
you
agree.
know and imagine the amount of money we would
Mhm.
save, but we never talk about that. I almost feel like as a group we should talk about that more. Why don't we talk more about using AI to replace the CEO of companies? Like
I,
it's we you know what, that's actually an interesting paper because
I couldn't agree more, really.
yeah, I think it would be so easy to create a machine learning algorithm to help a CEO make decisions and thus replace the CEO. And that would be something we should work on, Vincent. What do you think?
It's going to become things are coming to a head, I think. Management tries to cut costs, so sometimes myopically they look at a cost. So looking at paying a radiologist to read an X-ray of a long bone to see if there's a fracture. AI probably can do that as good as any radiologist in the world, right, at a decreased cost. So they see all these things and then they say, why don't we just get rid of all the radiologists? Well, they do more than looking at just fractures, right? So this is the challenge is they are myopic in what they see. And I think as physicians, we need to push back, like you said, like, wow, if you think that's all they do is very easy things that AI could replace, and you don't get it. So, but we need to be the voice of the physicians pushing back. Physicians generally don't work together well, pushing back on these statements, right? It's kind of hard to get consensus.
The
But
origin of the word doctor is teacher, right? A doctor is a
right.
teacher at the end of the day. And just like you say, one of the main roles of a radiologist is to explain to other doctors, but also to the patient if need be, what's
Well,
going on. And
yeah.
but unfortunately that brings me to another point now that I think about it. I remember this article in The Guardian a few months back. It was I believe a doctor in China was home visiting his mother in China or something. And the mother was explaining it's very hard to see a doctor. When I see the doctor's very busy. The doctor doesn't have time for me. But when I go onto a large language model, I don't want to mention one. Let's say Claude because I like them better. When I use Claude, um, Claude answers all my questions, doesn't rush me, and I think the conclusion was from the mother was that the doctor is more robotic than the large language model. And so
I, I have a couple of points on this,
yeah.
Andrew. And again, this is, I know we don't want to go into politics, but this is the politics of AI, let's say. I think, I don't know who that CEO is, but I think this is really very naive to say I want to replace a radiologist with simply an AI model. I think, and that's what I keep telling people when I work with the industry and even with medical staff. I don't want to become a surgeon, and you don't need to become really an AI expert. We could work together so that the AI become a tool at your disposal as a doctor or a radiologist to make your job better and perhaps faster and more efficient. But your presence is of extreme importance. Remember, if you give me the best AI tool in the world, I would rather be seen and reassured by a human being, not by AI model. My major concern about this, and that brings me back to, I think, a comment Mr. Elon Musk did say during the last Davos meeting. He said, like, we are heading toward an era where you don't need to work, basically, and things will be automated. I was really like very concerned about that specific statement. But looking at AI and looking that we are all using a lot of these tools for free, and as you know, in our beloved Western world, there's nothing for free. So I think what he meant, we are heading toward an era. It's not about people not working. We want people not thinking.
Hmm.
It's very dangerous. If we start relying on these tools to think for us and instead of us and do our jobs, and then say, sorry, I don't want to have a radiologist or maybe a software programmer or perhaps an engineer, and eventually even a surgeon could be replaced by a doctor. So what is
By a
happening?
robot, replaced by a
Yeah.
robot. Yeah, yeah.
And remember, we are talking about an industry that is currently controlled by 12 to 15 companies, you know?
Yeah.
This is very, very alarming. What I like to say that really AI and the domain, I like to call them the domain knowledge expertise, the engineers, the doctors, the teachers, we need to figure out a way to work together to make things better for the human and for all of us eventually. But it's actually, yes, it's worrying. Such statement is very worrying. I know a lot of the industries and the businesses and the big companies are driven by the profits. That's number one. But there is too many ethical issues that even they didn't even think about it. If an AI radiologist like provide a diagnosis for me and that caused like a permanent damage, who's gonna be responsible for that?
Well, I
You
can tell you it's going to be the AI because there's going to be a line out the courtroom with doctors wanting to
know?
act as expert witnesses of whose fault that was. But
Yeah.
but at the end of the day, it's true. We don't know who's going to be calling the shots. Did you guys see today how they're using more and more robots in Ukraine on the front lines? And
Yeah.
and it's creating like a complete like dynamic industry now. of robots doing warfare, and Ukraine is leading that right now, and they're actually able to take a little bit of land back. But there's no restrictions there. If
No.
they develop an autonomous robot that kills things, I'm sure they're going to release it without any concern that they might not be able to control it one day.
That is, yeah, it's already happening, and that's why now in recent wars you see like the massive numbers of civilian. It's just like, because we're talking about AI in the medical domain, when we build, let's say, a model to some fracture detection, ideally you want to pass that decision to the radiologist, and he will see that this AI model is like, let's say, 75% confident that there is a fracture. And then the radiologist, with his extensive expertise and training, will call the shots. Now, what they are doing now, they want to automate this. And that's why we are all talking about agentic AI. I want a fully autonomous AI agent to take the decision and actually call the shots and act with minimal or close to zero human intervention. So in the case of the radiologist example, okay, 57, 75%, there is a fracture. The AI agent can proceed and actually do the treatment. In a warfare zone, if an AI agent decides that this child who's maybe 3 miles away is a potential risk with maybe, I don't know, a probability that reaches 65%, then he could act upon that, you
You
know?
know, Unfortunately, I wonder if AI would be more compassionate in some of those decisions than in certain regions that we've seen. But we're not going to go there. We're gonna shift away from there
Yeah.
very very quickly. Um, um, Vincent, what do you think about a paper with this about actually how much easier it is to replace economic decisions by AI as opposed to replacing radiologists? And at the same time, it's a two-part question. My concern is that they don't replace all radiologists. They replace 99% of all radiologists, and they keep one radiologist who validates all of the studies. I mean, that's also the problem. It only takes one traitor, if you will, to potentially ruin the whole pot. You could theoretically have one radiologist to validate all the studies for an entire New York City system, or you could have one per hospital or what have you. And how do we avoid that also at the same time? So good luck with that one, Vincent.
Well, you know what, we have expertise in call centers, and that's why I'm bringing this up. Is
Mhm.
the last AI company I was at, we went into I can't say the insurance company name, but they had 5,000 call center employees taking calls. And when you
Mhm.
analyze the calls coming in, many of them were very simple, like, what are your hours of operation? What's my balance in my account? And a human being at a high cost answered that question. So it got very easy to understand that 30% of those calls coming in could very easily be handled by AI with extremely high accuracy. The
Mhm.
people didn't get fired. They were moved up into roles where their mind was used better. Not
Exactly.
not what time is the store open, but a more complex question.
Mhm. Mhm.
So just like Andrew, and unfortunately surgeons maybe were at fault. It used to be that you needed two surgeons to do gallbladder surgery, laparoscopy, a first assistant and the surgeon. And then they said, well, we won't pay the first assistant anymore because you don't really need him. And the surgeons didn't say, no, 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 you can't do this. Sorry, we're all going to go on. So what happened? Now you do it by yourself. So, once the model is, you don't need something, it very quickly gets pushed aside because the economics say push it aside. Now, say, I think with the radiologists, if a radiologist is going to spend 8 hours doing something, don't we want them to do more complex things that require more
Mhm.
intellect, more thinking?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
very simple things like a negative mammogram. I mean that's pretty easy for the AI to do. Do we need to have a radiologist, kind of doing that for at X dollars per session, or
Mhm.
can they do a batch review? And the machine gets smarter and smarter as we know. So I
Absolutely.
think there's a dance between the human and the machine. we don't necessarily wipe people out, but the same metric has to be applied to management. You can't police the physicians and then say the management people get a free ride. We're not going to look at anything they do. They're in charge. If they do good, better, or indifferent, nothing happens. The same metric has to be applied to leadership, to everybody, right? That's the beauty of all this.
I,
And
I
it's like
100% agree with you, Vincent. I think
an
that's a
exciting
very,
time.
yeah, yeah. I mean, just if I may answer your question back,
Of course.
Andrew, I would highly recommend the book Thinking Fast and Slow. I mean, really, it's a very good book, and it shows an experiment that was carried out, I guess, by the author and some of his team, where they compared, there is something called stock market experts. So you hire one of these, and those guys will tell you which stocks to buy and when, etc. And they compared that to some basic, I think, even regression models or some models. And they discovered that those stock market expertise is close to basically a random guess.
Yeah.
So I would argue there, I can easily replace a stock market expert by an AI model, and maybe I could use that expertise or retrain. But the bottom line is exactly what Vincent said. We want to use these tools to make our life better and maybe to allow us to focus on more, serious stuff and let them do the maybe procedural, repetitive task that does not require really that, deep thinking. And that is important. But my concern is probably in some industries, that's not where they are heading, really, unfortunately.
Right. Right.
I mean, we've been saying this for a while. We want the AI to help us so that we actually have more time to talk with our patients. I mean, we've all said that. But that's what I love about AI. I mean, how much paperwork and billing and coding and all
Yeah.
this nonsense. Like, when I see patients, I spend less and less time looking at them and more time looking at my computer. If AI could eliminate that whole thing and I could just talk with my patient,
Mhm.
that would be, I don't know why the CEO, maybe the poor CEO, I like to think he was misquoted or they limited his quotation or something. But nonetheless, I'm really curious about how we can formulate a paper looking at, that would talk about that. That would be a great
I
paper.
think it would be a very nice idea. Remember, this is very like under explored, I think, space. People are not sure what will happen and how the job landscapes will change over the course of the next few years. I mean, usually when I go and talk to people and in events, my first bullet point would be always reskill and upskill.
Sure.
You don't know what is going to happen. Now, for the medical domain and the radiologist and the surgeons and the staff, I think it would be catastrophic if there are some people there seriously thinking that we want to replace these human experts, with an AI model. And the AI model will never be compassionate. It's a mathematical model. It takes numbers and spits out numbers, and nothing more or less. It will give you a probability that this mammogram shows some cancerous
Well, what
cell.
about what about this woman who said that the AI was better than her doctor, was more compassionate, spent time, asked all her questions, was very polite. A lot of people,
Yeah, yeah, well,
like
that's
it
another,
better.
by the way, I mean, this is one of my also major concerns, I have to say. So remember when the social media started? They gave you Facebook account and it was free, and they gave you Twitter account and it was free, and you could do so many beautiful things, communicate with friends across the Atlantic and in real time, and you were getting this for free, but actually you were not getting it for free. Everything you have there posted, your behavior, your likes, your dislikes, your friends and unfriends, all became part of training these large, gigantic language models. And you contributed to that. So we have these AI models that basically were trained using human knowledge. Another question, which maybe again I think people started to raise, if we carry on at this pace, remember all the models we have right now and all these beautiful technologies have been trained in human knowledge. In 5 years' time, these models will be retrained and refined on AI knowledge. So it's like our knowledge as humans, if we continue like this, will get thinner and we will become like I like to call it shortcut learning, you know. If you ask me to draft a paper about, replacing CEOs, instead of go and do the hard work, I will jump into ChatGPT and start asking it. So in a way, we are actually, maybe all of us are attracted to one single echo chamber, and we have to think in this way. And that brings me back to Elon Musk statement about no need to work. It seems like he couldn't say that no need to think. And that is very dangerous, really.
No, I mean, we're in such an existential crisis. If mankind doesn't have work to do, and I don't, something to do, I'm terrified for the future.
But
I'm so glad that there in some countries are banning social media up until yeah,
16.
until the brain has time to form, because all these studies showing when you use large language models that your brain activity is much lower. You're not creating
Yeah.
those connections. It's this whole last generation that basically grew up under the worst situation, the worst way to learn. I think we're going to be in COVID. I think we're going to be paying for that for the rest of our lives, guys.
Andrew, if I may say, because you don't want to terrify the audience, I think humans are very resilient. And I'm talking about the humans all over the world. They overcome so many challenges over the history. I live in Scotland now, and Scotland is a beautiful country. I mean, specifically, you come in summer, wonderful, countryside and
And the
landscape.
people,
And
fantastic.
the people are,
And the
I
most
mean,
beautiful English
yeah,
language accent
yeah.
of all time, you
Oh,
know?
definitely. So please come and visit Scotland. But sometimes when I go around the country and I just think about 400 years back, how the Scots lived in such harsh weather environment without any of the facilities we have today.
Yeah.
And that shows like, how resilient and strong the human natures are. So I think we will survive this wave, but perhaps, as you said, governments, big tech companies, intellect people should come together and maybe draw some boundaries. I don't like over regulations, but I think there should be some regulations as well to control this, mass scale production of AI tools, basically that do everything for you.
Andrew, I just have a quick comment at the you brought up a good question, but I'm gonna be a little bit of a troublemaker. The three of us have probably 100 years worth of studies, right? We're all multidiscipline, multi-degreed people. And we're writing a lot of papers, and we write interdisciplinary papers, computer science, machine learning, human dignity, clinical medicine, economics, and we're using large language models to help us with editing and things.
True.
So when you upload those interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, complex documents, that machine learns really fast. It took us collectively 100 years of going to school to
Hmm.
formulate our minds. So now the more papers we write and the more we upload and it's analyzing this interdisciplinary thinking process from a systems approach. Look how much it's learning.
Hmm.
And there's no, we're stuck. You can't be that productive unless you use these tools, right? So if we want to be productive, we have to use the tools. But once you use the tool, it's in its knowledge. So you can't pull it back. So it just keeps getting smarter, right? And you made a good point. In 5 years, it may have enough insight that an 18-year-old kid that it won't need its experience, it won't need its mind. It will
Hmm.
have no role. What could it offer the AI that it didn't learn already? It doesn't need to learn the same thing again. So so what do we do? Like how do we be productive and not use those tools? Because it's learning on what we do.
So
And
we
we
have
have
less than 2 minutes, and that's a perfect segue because, as you can see, Vincent and I grew up on Terminator, the movie. We know how that movie panned out. So, Vincent and I are much more, I think, paranoid than you are. But one of the
Mhm.
reasons why we created the Society Artificial Intelligence Organization for the Next Generation of Surgeons is we worry about these things. We need to talk about these things. We need to join as a group, and not just surgeons. We need radiologists, we need computer scientists, we need engineers, we need, entrepreneurs, we need everybody so that we can guide it in towards the light, towards where you want it to be, Ayad, and away from, you know, uh,
Mhm.
from
Mhm.
the singularity, the Terminator. So
Yeah.
Aons, AIONS dot AI. Ayad, we're gonna have to have you on. It's so great to speak with you. We wanted to do a short podcast today, but we used up all of our time. We're down to 1 minute. So Ayad, do you have any final words? And then I'll let Vincent close us out.
No, thank you both for having me again. I will just echo everything Vincent and you said, specifically the last point. Yes, no, we have to use these tools. I tell my PhD students to actually upload papers and see what AI, but I'm trying to find the balance, how
yeah.
we can continue to work and think and at the same time use these tools. And I tell you, it's not easy because we are sometimes tempted, to do things quickly, specifically maybe at the lower, the younger generation, we have to do something. We have to rethink the way we educate our kids, and that is very important. But I genuinely believe that humans collectively are resilient enough, to face your Terminator, Andrew. So I wouldn't worry about that.
We better end on that. We only have a few seconds left.